ASMR sleep stories with soothing sounds and scary Reddit storytelling. For sleep relaxation tingles whispered in a calm American voice to help you drift into deep sleep. You're listening to ASMR 404Found. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I never thought I would find myself walking down that forgotten trailhead again. One tucked behind the old ranger station in the backwoods of northern Oregon. The one locals called Black Pine Hollow Trail, most people in town avoided it not because of the thick brush or the steep climb, but because of the stories whispered around campfires. Late at night about folks who went missing there and never came back. You remember the first time I heard about it, my uncle was sitting on the porch, sipping on a can of cheap beer, the kind he always had after a long day working at the mill. He leaned over and told me real quiet like that trail was cursed. He said no matter how tough you were, no matter how sharp your knife or how bright your lantern, you would always come back different if you came back at all. His voice cracked when he said that, and I could see something flicker in his eyes like he was remembering something he never wanted to talk about again. He was 19 back then, full of dumb courage and that kind of restless itch that makes you want to prove everyone wrong. So one late summer night when the crickets were buzzing and the air smelled like pine and smoke, I told my buddy Dave we should go hike it just to see what all the fuss was about. He laughed, slapped me on the back and said, "Hell yeah, man. Let's show this town how superstitious they are." We packed flashlights, jerky, a couple of cans of Mountain Dew, and headed out in his rusted Chevy pickup, the tires crunching down the gravel road leading into the woods. The trailhead sign was crooked, almost falling over, half covered in moss, the paint peeling so bad you could barely read the words. Black Pine Hollow. Someone had spray painted a warning across it in bright red letters that said "Turn back now." Dave laughed so hard he nearly dropped his flashlight and said, "Looks like some kid tried to spook hikers." But I felt my chest tighten. The air around that sign was heavier, like when a storm is rolling in and you know the lightning is about to split the sky. We stepped past the sign and the trail swallowed us up. The trees closed and overhead thick pines bending and twisting so tight that barely any moonlight slipped through the branches. Our flashlights cut through the dark, but only just enough to see the dirt path, littered with pine needles and old roots. Every sound was sharper out there, the crunch of our boots, rustle of unseen critters, the distant hoot of an owl. Everything echoed like the forest was alive and listening. At first it was just a hike like any other, path winding deeper and deeper into the woods, the smell of damp earth rising around us. I kept telling myself this was nothing more than another ghost story, but about half a mile and I started noticing little things off things I could not explain. The first was the silence. No more owls, no more rustling leaves. No wind, just silence pressing down like a weight. The second was the smell of sharp metallic tang like rust or old blood that came and went in the breeze even though there was no breeze at all. And then there were the carvings. You ran my hand over one of the trees, the bark rough against my skin. Deep gouge ran along its trunk, symbols I didn't recognize, circles with slashes, strange crooked letters, some looking like runes from an old book I saw once in the library. Dave joked that it was just bored kids messing around, but his laugh was thin, forced, and he kept glancing over his shoulder. like he was trying to make sure no one was creeping up behind us. Kept walking the trail, growing narrower until the branches scraped our arms. Our flashlights barely pierced the dark. I could swear the path twisted in ways that didn't make sense. Sometimes I felt like we were walking in circles, even though my phone's compass said we were going straight. The woods felt wrong, like it was folding in on itself, and the deeper we went, the more my stomach knotted. That was when we heard it, a voice drifting through the trees, faint at first, then louder, calling our names clear as day, but drawn out in this strange sing-song tone, like someone mocking us. Dave froze mid-step. His face pale, he whispered that no one knew we were out there. No one at all. My throat went dry and every instinct screamed at me to turn around. But my legs kept moving like something was pulling me forward where it reached a clearing. About 20 minutes later, the ground sloping down into a circle surrounded by towering pines. In the middle of it stood an old wooden cabin, leaning like it had been abandoned for 100 years. Its windows dark, its door hanging crooked on broken hinges. The smell of rot rolled out from it, thick and sour, making my stomach churn. Dave muttered that this wasn't on any map, and he was right. We had studied the area before leaving, and nothing like this showed up anywhere I wanted to leave. I wanted to turn back and run, but the moment I turned toward the trail, I realized I couldn't see it anymore. The path we came from was gone, swallowed up by the trees, leaving nothing but walls of pine stretching endlessly in every direction. I stood frozen in that clearing, staring at the crooked cabin, while the night pressed in tighter around us, the air so heavy it felt like breathing through wet cloth. Dave muttered under his breath that he didn't like this place, and his flashlight beam trembled across the warped boards of the cabin walls. I kept telling myself it was just an old hunting shack, just another relic left behind from decades ago. But the longer I stared, the less it looked like any place a man had ever built. Boards weren't nailed the way normal lumber fits together. They seemed twisted, bent into place, like the trees themselves had been forced to grow into walls. Some of the wood even had bark still clinging to it, and I swear I could see knots pulsing faintly as though veins ran through them. The windows were jagged holes, cut uneven like a hand without tools, had clawed through just enough space to look out from inside, and the roof sagged under piles of damp leaves that seemed to never dry. Even though it hadn't rained in weeks, Dave whispered that maybe someone still lived there, maybe a hermit or a drifter squatting in the woods. But the second he said it, the door creaked open on its broken hinge. No wind, no hand, just a long, slow groan that echoed across the clearing. My flashlight flickered like the batteries were draining, even though I'd replaced them just that morning, and my skin prickled as if the woods themselves were leaning closer to watch. He tried to turn back, tried to step toward the tree line, but the path was gone. Every direction I looked was just wall. The wall of dark pine branches, no trail, no footprints, nothing. Dave cursed under his breath, said this was impossible, but the word cracked in his throat, like even his own voice didn't believe him. Smell hit us harder than sharp and rotting like meat left out in the sun. It rolled from the doorway, thick enough to taste metallic, bitter and sour. I gagged and covered my nose, but Dave lifted his shirt up over his mouth and said, "Screw it, let's just check it out. Maybe we can find another way through from the other side." I didn't want to follow, but his light was already moving toward the door, and something deep in my gut told me I couldn't let him go in alone, who stepped over the warped threshold and the floor groaned under our boots. The air inside was worse, colder, damper, as if we had stepped into the crawl space of some buried tomb. My light cut across the room and revealed walls, covered in carvings, the same symbols we'd seen on the trees. But here they were everywhere, burned into the wood scrape so deep the grooves bled darkness. They crossed the board, circles, lines, spirals, jagged marks that seemed to shimmer when I looked. Too long in the center of the room was a chair, or what had once been a chair. It was blackened by fire, its seat soaked so deep with dark stains that the boards beneath it warped around the puddle. Dave's beam shook across it and he whispered, "What the hell happened here?" But before I could answer, the door slammed shut behind us. The sound like thunder cracking through the hollow room. He spun around and the doorway was gone. And just closed, but gone as though it had never been there, replaced with a wall of carved with symbols crawling across it like veins. My chest tightened, panic clawed up my throat. I pounded on the wall, but it felt solid, thick like stone. Dave grabbed my arm, told me to calm down, but his voice was shaking worse then. Minute then we heard it again, that voice drifting soft through the cabin, this time not from outside, but from somewhere deep below our feet. It called my name, slow, dragging each syllable. Like it had all the time in the world. My blood turned cold and Dave's face went white. He whispered that no one should know my name out here. No one. Floorboards beneath us trembled faintly, a rhythm like a heartbeat, slow, steady. Then faster the symbols along the walls began to glow, faint red pulsing in time with the beat. The stains on the chair shimmered wet like they had just been spilled. And the air grew hotter, thicker, pressing in around us. Dave shouted that we needed to find a way out, and started kicking at the wall, his boot thudding against the wood, but leaving no mark at all. Voice grew louder, rising from below the floor, as though something was crawling up through the boards. I dropped my flashlight in my shaking hands, but the beam tilted down across the gaps between the planks. I swear I saw an eye staring back up at me, yellow and slick with a slit pupil, like some kind of serpent but human in shape. It blinked slowly once, then disappeared into the dark below. I yanked Dave away from the center of the room just as the chair toppled on its side, the puddle beneath it bubbling like tar. Something began pushing through the cracks, black fingers, long and twisted, curling up from below, clutching at the floor. The wood bent upward, groaning under the weight of something, forcing its way through. Dave screamed, a sound I'd never heard come out of him before. High and desperate, he swung his flashlight down, smashing it against the fingers. But the beam cut out, sparks flying before the light went dead, leaving only the red glow of the symbols to guide us. I stumbled backward, slamming against the wall, my hands scrambling across the carvings until I felt one set deeper than the rest, my fingers sinking into the grooves, and suddenly the wall shifted. It didn't open, not like a door, but it stretched like skin, pulling back, revealing a narrow passage blacker than the cabin itself. I shouted for Dave and shoved him through the gap, the voice behind us rising into a scream, now shrill and jagged like broken glass, tearing through my skull. The fingers clawed higher, dragging half a face through the cracks, skinless teeth, gnashing eyes bulging wide with hunger. Shoved myself into the passage and the wall snapped. just behind us, sealing out the glow ceiling, out the screaming, sealing out everything but the suffocating dark. The dark swallowed us whole, and I could hear nothing but Dave's ragged breathing close to my ear. The passage was so tight our shoulders scraped damp walls on either side, slick with something. I didn't want to think about my flashlight was. Dave's was smashed, and yet I could see a faint reddish glow pulsing along the walls. Not bright enough to guide, but enough to keep me from falling blind. It throbbed slow like a heartbeat, and I knew it was the same rhythm we felt in the cabin, only now it was inside the walls themselves, crawled forward the ground, uneven sharp rocks, cutting at my palms, knees bruising against the floor. Dave whispered over and over, "We gotta get out. We gotta get out," his voice cracking higher each time. I wanted to tell him to shut up, but I didn't trust my voice. Either I was afraid that if I spoke, the tunnel itself would answer after what felt like hours. The passage opened wider, and I nearly fell forward into a cavern that spread out beneath. The forest, it wasn't natural, not carved by water or time, but by hands or claws. The walls curved smooth, covered in those same carvings, circles, lines, spirals, glowing faint red like veins running under. The stone, the air was thicker here, wet and humming like it vibrated through my bones. In the center of the cavern rose a mound of earth. On top of it stood something I still can't explain. At first it looked like a tree trunk, black bark twisted, reaching upward, but as I stared, the shape shifted. A body stretched to tall arms, to long bent backward joints, crooked like broken branches. If face with no skin, just sinew stretched tight across a skull, grin, wide eyes, empty sockets glowing. Faint yellow, the thing didn't move, but I felt it watching, felt its stare sliding under my skin. Dave grabbed my sleeve, whispered, "We can't be here. Man, we need to run," but the cavern had no other tunnel, no other way. The walls circled us like a trap, and the only way back was the narrow passage that had already sealed behind us. I shook my head, tried to steady my breath, but the mound beneath that figure began to move, the soil shifting like something alive. Was buried under it. Dozens of pale hands pushed up through the dirt, small hands, thin and trembling like children trying to crawl free, their fingers digging into the soil, only to sink back down again, pulled by something stronger. The figure atop the mound tilted its head, the sound of cracking bone echoing through the cavern. Then its jaw stretched open, far wider than human teeth, long and jagged, black with rot glistening like wet stone. It didn't speak, but the voice filled the cavern anyway, the same voice that had called us in the woods, that had whispered through cabin, only now it was inside my head, slow, deliberate, calling my name with a hunger that made bile rise in my throat. Dave screamed and bolted toward the wall, slamming his fists against the carvings, his knuckles splitting, blood smearing across the symbols. The glowing red shifted brighter with each drop, like the stone was drinking him. And the figure leaned forward, its long arms reaching downward, fingers curling like roots, digging into the mound. The pale child hands below clawed faster, desperate, like they were trying to climb up into the open air, but every time they rose higher, the roots tangled them, pulled them back under. Couldn't move, my legs locked, my chest seized, my ears rang. But that voice calling again and again, dragging each syllable until it felt like it was tearing something out of me. Dave turned back, eyes wide, screaming my name, begging me to run. but there was nowhere to run. The air itself pressed against me, like walls tightening closer and closer. The glow, blinding now, red pulsing through the stone, the mound splitting open wider, as if the earth was birthing something older, something hungrier. The creature raised one hand, and the cavern shook, dust raining down from above, stones splitting, cracks racing across the ceiling. I stumbled backward, fell to my knees, my hands sinking into soil that moved like flesh, hot and pulsing. The ground writhed beneath me. I realized the entire cavern was alive, breathing around us, every wall, every inch of dirt, part of something deeper. Dave screamed again, but it cut off sudden, choked. I spun toward him and saw roots black and slick piercing through his chest, wrapping around his ribs, pulling him toward the wall. He clawed at them, his eyes wild, mouth frothing, blood spilling down his chin, but the roots dragged him in faster, sinking him into the stone, his body bending unnatural as he disappeared piece by piece, his last scream gurgling, until only silence filled the cavern. He was alone, knees in that pulsing soil, my breath ragged, my body shaking, and the figure still stood atop the mound, staring, its jaw still open, the voice still filling my skull, now not calling my name, but whispering words I couldn't understand, sounds twisted, jagged, broken syllables that cut like glass. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't matter. The sound wasn't through my ears, it was inside me, rattling through my bones, through my teeth, through my blood. The mound shifted again, more hands rising, pale, trembling, dozens, hundreds clawing the air, their fingernails scraping against one another, as if trying to build some kind of ladder out of each other. The figure lifted its arms wide, the sockets of its eyes burning yellow brighter. The soil shook harder, and I realized if I didn't move, if I didn't find a way, I would be swallowed into that mound. Just like DeVay, forced myself up, legs weak, stumbling toward the wall, my hands slapping against the glowing carvings. One of the symbols burned hotter than, dressed a spiral, deep cut, glowing brighter than the others. I pressed into it hard enough to tear my palm open, blood smearing across the grooves. The stone screamed a sound like metal tearing, and the wall ripped open into another passage, black, air pouring through. He didn't hesitate. I threw myself into the dark behind it, the sound of the cavern collapsing, shaking through my bones. The last thing I saw was the figure turning its head completely upside down, its sockets blazing, its jaw still wide as hundreds of pale hands clawed upward toward the light. The tunnel spat me out into pitch dark, the ground beneath me slick with mud and stone cutting into my knees. I gasped for air, but it felt heavier down here, thicker, as if the air itself had weight. I clawed forward, desperate to get away from that cavern, but the passage was twisting, shifting every few feet, as though it was alive, walls closing tighter, then widening again like a throat swallowing. I scraped my palms raw, trying to drag myself forward, my heartbeat pounding in my ears, drowning out everything until the silence hit again. You froze, silence so absolute it felt deafening. No drip of water, no scuttle of insects, no echo of my own movements. Just nothing. I whispered Dave's name without thinking, even though I had seen what happened to him. My voice cracked against the wall, swallowed before it could even carry forward, as if the air itself refused to let sound travel. The tunnel curved downward, and the red glow returned, faint at first, pulsing from somewhere ahead. I followed it against every instinct I had, because the dark behind me felt heavier than the glow ahead. chamber smaller than a cavern, but worse in a way. This chamber was filled with bones, piles of them scattered across the floor. Some cracked, some still with scraps of flesh clinging, their smell sour. And sharp animal bones, deer elk maybe, but mixed among them were human remains I knew, because the skulls stared from the heap's empty sockets. Wide jaws frozen mid-scream, their teeth black with rot, their bones etched with the same symbols, carved deep into them as if marked by the same hand that had carved the cabin. Walsey stumbled through the piles, bones crunching under my boots, my breath ragged, the glow stronger here. Bleeding from cracks in the stone, the light was wrong, shifting like it pulsed to a rhythm my body couldn't match, and then I heard it again, not the voice, not the whisper, but a low hum rising from the cracks deep, vibrating through the chamber. Like something enormous was breathing beneath. You see, backed against the wall, shaking, trying to steady myself, but my hand pressed into one of the cracks and burned. Like fire, I yanked it back and saw blood dripping from my palms, soaking into the stone. The hum deepened louder now, shaking the piles of bones until they rattled and toppled, one skull rolling across the floor to stop at my feet, its empty sockets glowing faint. Ready kicked it away, stumbled backward, but as it rolled, it cracked open along the seam, and something spilled out, a black liquid, thick and crawling like it had a life of its own. Puddle spread across the floor toward me, moving against the slope, against gravity, until it touched my boot. I screamed and kicked, but it clung sticky, pulling at the sole like tar threads, stretching from it back to the puddly. Tore free, stumbling, but the puddle rose higher now, forming a shape, stretching upward, thin arms ahead, no features, just a smooth surface like wax. But dripping black, the hum rose into a shriek, and the figure lunged, arms snapping toward me, fingers stretching like claws. I dug between the piles of bones, scrambling as they cracked and split beneath me, sharp edges slicing my hands. But I didn't stop. I crawled for the far side of the chamber, where a narrow gap cut through the wall. The figure screamed, though it had no mouth, the sound drilling into my skull, a shrill wail that made my teeth ache. I squeezed into the gap, bones catching on my clothes, ripping at my skin, the passage cutting my shoulders. As I forced myself through, I could feel the black figure's claws scraping at the stone just behind me, leaving long grooves that sparked with red light, but somehow it couldn't follow through the copy. Collapsed on the other side, chest heaving, my hands shaking so bad I could barely push myself up. The tunnel stretched ahead, low and jagged water dripping down in cold streams that tasted metallic when they hit my lips. I crawled forward on raw palms, knees bruised, pushing myself deeper until the glow returned again. Not red this time, but yellow, faint flickers like lanterns swaying in a stormy. Followed the light, and the tunnel widened again, opening into a cavern that looked different from the others. Its walls weren't stone, but wood beams rotting, collapsing, but still standing like some kind of mine shaft abandoned decades ago. The lanterns swung from hooks nailed into the beams, their flames weak but steady, casting shadows that bent and twisted like they were elevated. The floor was dirt, damp and uneven, and scattered across it were tools, rusted shovels, pickaxes, broken lanterns, cans crushed flat as if someone had left in a hurry. I picked one up, the metal flaking under my fingers, the label gone, but the smell still sharp like spoiled food. Then I noticed the carvings again, Not on the walls this time, but on the beams burned. Deep into the wood spirals, lines, symbols repeating over and over, as if they had been branded into the very structure. As they shifted colder, and I realized wasn't alone in that cavern. I heard the scrape of something metal dragging against the dirt. Slow, deliberate, I turned my lightless gaze toward the sound and saw a figure standing at the far end, half hidden in shadow, tall, thin, shoulders hunched, holding what looked like a rusted pickaxe. Dragging its blade across the ground, the lanterns swayed harder, casting light across its face, and I wished they hadn't. Face wasn't a face anymore. Skin torn away, jaw dangling by thin strips of tendon, eyes gone, leaving only black holes, blood dried in thick trails down the chest. And yet it stood swaying, the pickaxe dragging closer. Step by step I stumbled back, but another scrape answered from behind me. I spun and saw another figure stepping from the shadows, this one holding a shovel, its body broken, ribs jutting, skin, gray lips torn but moving like it was trying to whisper. Then another stepped out, and another, each one carrying a tool, each one broken, torn, hollow, eyes black but burning faint with yellow light. They moved slow, dragging their weapons against the dirt, the sound rising like a chant, the lanterns flaring brighter shadows, stretching long like hands reaching for me. Tried to run, but the floor was soft, sucking at my boots like mud. Each step harder than the last, the figures circling closer, the chant growing louder, though none of their mouths moved. I screamed, but the sound died in my throat, my voice devoured by the cavern, until all that was left was that scraping chorus echoing against the beams like nails on bone. The scraping sound grew louder, surrounding me from every side, the broken figures closing in, their shadows stretching across the beams like claws, reaching to pull me down. I staggered backward, heart pounding, but the dirt floor sucked at my boots, tighter with each step, pulling me ankle deep, then higher, as if the ground itself wanted to hold me still. I fought against it, tearing free with a sucking noise that made bile rise in my throat. The lanterns swung harder, their flames whipping, though no wind touched them, their light flickering across faces that were no longer human. Torn jaws, cracked skulls, hollow sockets burning with yellow sparks. Bolted toward the far side of the mine shaft, forcing my legs through the mud, my breath ragged, my vision blurring with panic. The figures followed, dragging their tools against the dirt, the screeching sound climbing higher until it felt like knives slicing through my ears. One of them swung the rusted pickaxe, and it struck a beam beside me, sending splinters flying, the wood groaning like it was alive. I shoved forward faster, slamming my shoulder into a rotting door at the end of the shaft. It splintered and gave way, throwing me into another tunnel. This tunnel was narrower, lined with stone, not wood, the air damp cold, my breath visible even though it was summer outside. I ran deeper, my hands scraping along the walls for balance as the tunnel twisted, the sound of scraping tools echoing behind me, growing fainter but never gone. Always following, always dragging, step by step, the tunnel sloped down sharper, my boots slipping on wet stone until I lost footing and slid tumbling into blackness, hitting rocks and dirt, until I slammed into the floor of another chamber, my ribs screaming with pain. I rolled onto my back, trying to suck in air, but the chamber itself seemed to breathe each inhale deep, rattling each exhale, shaking the ground. I forced myself to sit up and saw that the walls were covered in roots black. Slick twisting like veins, they pulsed faintly as if carrying something through them. Some thick dark blood that smelled metallic and sour. In the center of the chamber stood a pool shallow but wide, its surface black as oil rippling though no wind touched it. I crawled closer against my better judgment, drawn to it like a moth to flame. When I leaned over the surface, I saw my reflection staring back, not my real face, but something wrong. My eyes black, my mouth split wide with teeth I didn't own. My skin stretched thin, gray, and cracked. I stumbled back, shaking my head, whispering, "No over." Over, but the reflection didn't fade. It smiled wider until the skin split further. The teeth gnashing like broken glass, clicking together. The pool rippled harder and a hand broke through its surface. Pale small, a child's hand dripping with black liquid, clawing at the air. Another hand followed, then another, until dozens of them reached upward. All small, all trembling, their nails broken, their skin thin and peeling, their arms stretching higher and higher as if begging for help. Then the surface split wider and something larger pushed through ahead. Pale eyeless, jawless skin peeled back to reveal a gaping hole where a face should be. It rose higher, its neck long, its shoulders bent, broken, then another face pushed through, then another, until the pool was spilling bodies, pale, twisted, malformed, all clawing their way into the chamber. Scrambled back to the wall, my nails digging into stone, trying to climb upward, but the walls were slick with roots pulsing against my skin. Like heartbeats, the bodies dragged themselves out of the pool, their limbs jerking, twitching, their heads lolling, their mouths opening though they had no tongues, no throats, yet sound spilled from them, a wailing chorus, high and shrill like hundreds of children crying all at once. They screamed for Dave. Though I knew he was gone, my voice drowned by that chorus, the sound cutting deeper into my skull, until blood trickled from my ears. I clamped my hands over them, but it made no difference. The sound wasn't outside, it was inside my head, drilling deeper and deeper. Pale bodies dragged closer, their nails scratching the stone, their heads snapping toward me all at once. Though they had no eyes, I knew they could see. Meth pool rippled again. From its center rose a figure taller than the rest, its body thin, skinless, veins bulging black, its arms too long, its hands tipped with claws dripping. Like Iker, it stepped free of the pool and stood towering over the others, its head turning slowly toward me, though no features marked its face. And yet I felt its stare burn through me, its presence heavier than anything else I had felt in those. Woods it raised one hand and the chorus stopped. Silence slammed into the chamber, so hard it hurt my ears more than the wailing. At the smaller bodies froze, heads tilted, waiting for some command. The figure pointed toward me, its claw stretching so long it nearly touched my chest. Though it stood yards away, the bodies moved all at once, their hands clawing, their legs jerking, dragging themselves toward me in a tide of pale fleshy turn. Slammed my fists against the wall, desperate, searching for anything, any crack, any opening, and I felt one give beneath my palm, a small gap too tight. But I shoved myself against it, bones scraping skin, tearing my chest, compressing. As I forced through stone cutting across my face, I screamed raw as my body scraped through, and the last thing I felt before I slipped into the gap, dozens of pale hands clutching at my legs, nails tearing skin, trying to drag me back into their tide. The gap spat me into blackness, my body slamming onto stone so hard. I saw bursts of light behind my eyes, blood running down my arms and legs. From where the pale hands had torn at me, I lay there for a moment, chest heaving, the silence pressing in. So thick I almost thought I had gone deaf. Then slowly a sound began to rise, a drip steady and hollow, echoing from somewhere ahead. He pushed myself up, every bone in my body aching, the air colder, hair sharper, each breath cutting like glass. I stumbled forward, hands trailing along the rough stone walls, following the sound of the drip, until faint light appeared ahead, not red, not yellow, but white, pale, and sickly like the glow of a hospital bulb. It flickered, spilling across the end of the tunnel. The walls widened into another chamber. The chamber was lined with shelves, not stone shelves, but wooden planks nailed into the walls, old, rotting yet still holding weight stacked across them. Are jars, hundreds, maybe thousands, glass jars of all shapes, each filled with liquid thick and murky, some green, some black, some pale. Inside each jar floated something small. At first I thought insects, twisted beetles, spiders. But as I drew closer, my stomach nodded. They were not insects. They were part-sized, floating, blank mouths, separate small hands, tiny bones curled into fists. Each jar sealed, tight, wax dripping down their lids. He stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. The drip louder now, echoing until I realized it came from the far side of the chamber, where a table stood, long and rough-hewn, stained dark. With what could only be blood upon it lay a figure, small, child-sized, covered with a sheet. The drip came from beneath it, pooling onto the stone floor, drop by drop, spreading in slow streams. I wanted to turn back, wanted to run, but the tunnel behind me was gone, replaced with solid wall as though it had never existed. The sheet twitched once, then again a slow rise like breath. The air turned colder, the jars rattled faintly on the shelves, their contents knocking glass against glass. The sheet slid off by itself, peeling away to reveal what lay beneath it, and my knees nearly gave out. It was not a child anymore. Its skin gray, stretched tight across bone, its mouth stitched shut, its eyes sewn closed, but still moving, flickering under the threads. Its chest rose and fell slow, deliberate, the drip of black ichor spilling from a wound at its setted jars rattled harder, some cracking liquid spilling down the shelves. The child's stitched mouth tore open, threads snapping one by one, until it gaped wide, far wider than it should. Teeth jagged, sharp, rows upon rows, not human, not possible. A sound spilled from it, a low moan, deep, vibrating, shaking the shelves until jars shattered, glass raining across the chamber, their contents spilling onto the floor. Small hands crawling, severed mouths, gnashing teeth, eyes rolling in black liquid. They moved together, slithering across the stone, dragging toward me. Screamed and pressed myself against the wall. But the stitched figure sat upright, slowly, painfully, bones cracking, skin tearing. As it moved, its sewn eyes burst open, black liquid pouring down its face, sockets empty but burning faint yellow. It raised one trembling hand toward me, its fingers long, thin, nails sharp, and the moan grew louder until it shook the chamber, dust falling from the ceiling, crawling pieces spilled over my boots. Tiny hands clutching my legs, severed mouths biting at my skin. Their teeth sharp enough to pierce. I kicked and stomped, but more poured from broken jars, covering the floor, dragging themselves toward me like a tide of scraps. The stitched figure slid from the table, its legs broken, bending backward, but still. It walked step by step, each movement wet and cracking, its mouth opening wider. The sound rising into a scream so sharp my vision blurred, he tried to claw at the wall. Desperate for escape, nails ripping, bleeding across stone, then I felt a seam beneath. My fingers, another crack glowing faint white, I shoved at it screaming, until it split wide enough for me to dive through. I didn't care if it tore me open, I didn't care. If it crushed me, I forced myself through the gap as the tide of crawling. Pieces swarmed higher, pulling at my legs, biting, tearing. The stitched figure scream, echoing into my skull until everything went black. You woke lying on dirt. The air different, thinner, fresher, but wrong in another way. It smelled of pine and wet moss, but beneath it was that same metallic tang. The glow above me was not from torches, not from red carvings, but from the moon, pale and cold, shining through a canopy of trees. Outside again, or I thought I pushed myself up, looking around, and saw I was back at a trail, only it wasn't the one we had entered. This path was narrower, lined with dead trees, their branches bare, clawing at the sky. No sound of crickets, no owls, no life, just silence so heavy it bent the night. He staggered forward, boots sinking into soft earth, the moonlight shifting strange shadows across the trail, shapes that didn't match the trees, tall figures bent, twisted, moving though nothing around me moved. I tried to keep my eyes on the path, but the shadows crept closer, longer, until they stretched across my chest. Like fingers wrapping tight, my breath hits the air colder, sharper, until every exhale smoked white. I turned desperate, looking for any sign of escape, but the trail stretched endless behind me, and ahead only darkness swallowing the path. It was when I heard it again, the voice softer than before, whispering from the trees, dragging my name, slow, deliberate, each syllable thick with hunger. I froze, my blood ice, my eyes scanning the dead branches, and I saw them, faces not whole, not human, but pale, stretched skin nailed into the bark. Their mouths open wide, teeth gnashing, though no bodies hung beneath them, their sockets empty, but glowing faint yellow, each face whispering my name. In unison, their voices crawling into my skull. He stumbled backward, but the trail behind me was gone, replaced with more trees, more nailed faces, their mouths opening wider, drooling black liquid that dripped down the trunks, their whispers rising louder, until the night itself seemed to chant my name. The forest pressed in closer, each step heavier than the last, my legs sinking deeper into the soft ground, as though the earth itself wanted to hold me in place. The nailed faces along the trees moved, their mouths stretching wider, skin tearing around, the edges black ooze spilling down the trunks until the roots were slick with it. The whispers grew louder, forming words more clear, dragging phrases into my ears. Come deeper, come. You belong, come where the trail ends. He tried to run, but every stride only carried me back to the same clearing, the same ring of dead trees, the same pale faces gnashing their teeth, my breath ragged, my chest burning. I clawed at my own arms, trying to ground myself, the dirt beneath my boots shifting softer, wetter until it wasn't dirt at all, but flesh, pale and stretched veins pulsing under the surface. Each step leaving dents that slowly rose back as if breathing. I looked down and saw an eye just beneath the surface, rolling and following me, its pupil wide, yellow light glowing in the dark. You stumbled back, tripping hard, landing on hands that sank wrist deep into the ground. It was warm, soft, writhing with movement beneath. Like worms twisting under a thin sheet of skin, I screamed and yanked. Free black fluid coating my fingers, burning like acid, every nerve on fire. I staggered up. Tried to run again, only to crash into something solid, something massive. It was a tree, but not like the others. This one pulsed as if alive, its bark pale, and wet, its surface covered with faces. Dozens, maybe hundreds, all stitched together, their mouths sewn shut, their eyes open wide, rolling in every direction, each face silently screaming. Yet the base of the tree was an opening, a hollow wide enough to crawl into. The nailed faces whispered again, their voices merging into a chant, pushing into my head until I couldn't think. Go inside, go inside. Go inside. The ground beneath me, writhed eyes opening and closing, lips moving, muttering my name. I felt something wrap around my ankle, long and then sharp, piercing into my skin, dragging me toward the hollow. It kicked, screamed, pulled with every ounce of strength. But the grip tightened, biting deeper, warm blood running down my boot as the pale line like appendage yanked me closer. I clawed at the dirt, my nails ripping, leaving trails of blood across the writhing ground, but nothing slowed the pull. I was dragged until my face was inches from the hollow, and the stench that spilled from it was worse than anything before. Sweet rot clinging in my lungs, making me gag inside. It was not darkness, but a glow, faint and red, pulsing like a heartbeat. Shadows shifting across the walls, not of branches, but of bodies writhing, twisting, trapped in the wood, their limbs bent at wrong angles, their faces buried in the grain, as though the tree had swallowed them whole. I screamed again, and the forest answered back, not with echoes, but with laughter, low and broken, a chorus of nailed faces cackling, until the air shook. Vine yanked hard, pulling me into the hollow, my shoulders scraping raw against the bark. I thrashed until skin peeled from my arms. My screams caught in my throat. I felt the tree swallowing me, its inside warm, wet walls squeezing tighter, dragging me deeper. I kicked my boots, slamming into the wood, but it groaned, almost pleased, the laughter outside fading as the walls closed around me. I was being eaten, consumed. Then suddenly the walls loosened, and I fell hard, landing on stone. The air here thick with ash and smoke, glowing faint red like fire burned somewhere far below. I coughed, each breath slicing my throat, my body shaking as I forced myself to my knees. This was no forest, this was no cave I had been dragged into. Something else, something deeper ahead, stretched a cavern wider than any I'd seen. The ceiling lost in shadow, the floor cracked, glowing faint orange, with lava seeping through the stone and thin streams across it. Figures moved, dozens of them there, bodies bent, broken, gray skin stretched across bone, their mouths sewn shut, their eyes glowing faint yellow. They moved in circles, slow, deliberate, around a massive pit in the center, each step dragging, each movement in rhythm as though in prayer. From pit rose smoke, thick black shapes writhing in it, clawing at the air before sinking again. Each time they appeared, they carried faces, twisted, screaming human faces, shifting in out of the smoke, their mouths wide, their voices muffled but desperate. The figures circling the pit moaned through their sewn mouths, the sound vibrating low in the stone until it shook through my bones. He tried to back away, but behind me the wall had closed, the tree gone, replaced by solid rock. The only way forward toward the pit. The heat grew heavier the closer I got, my skin blistering, my throat drying, my vision blurring. The figures turned toward me in unison, their glowing eyes burning through the smoke. They raised their arms, long, thin, claw-like, fingers reaching out toward me, not in attack, but in beckoning, urging me closer. Their mouths tore open, threads snapping, black fluid spilling as they moaned louder. The sound like 100 voices calling me to the pit. He clutched my head, screaming, but the sound grew sharper, drilling into my skull until I staggered forward each step, unwilling, my body moving on its own. The pit growing closer, the smoke spilling out, wrapping around my chest, searing my skin. The faces in it turning toward me, mouths open, screaming louder, louder, until I could not hear my own thoughts. The last thing I remember, before the smoke wrapped over my eyes, was the pit itself opening wider, its glow bright orange and deep red, and in the very center of it something rising, massive, towering, a shape with no face, no form, only endless limbs twisting, breaking, reforming, each one covered in faces screaming in unison. The thing that rose from the pit stretched higher than the cavern itself, its limbs long and boneless, writhing in ways that made my stomach twist, each arm splitting into smaller ones, branching like roots, then snapping together again, forming shapes of faces and mouths. Its body was not solid, but shifting constantly, a storm of flesh, bone, and shadow, each face screaming with a voice that clawed at my skull, until I wanted to rip my ears out. Smoke from the pit wrapped around me, pulling me closer. No matter how hard I fought, my legs moved without command, dragging forward, as if my bones had been hooked from the inside. The figures circling the pit parted, opening a path for me, their eyes glowing brighter, their sewn mouths torn wide, spilling that thick black ooze. They moaned low, vibrating deep in the stone, until cracks formed under their feet, glowing orange, the sound like a hive of bees. Inside my head, towering shape bent low, one massive limb lowering its end down to me, the flesh splitting open to reveal a mouth lined with teeth too many to count, grinding constantly, sparks flying as enamel tore against enamel. The breath from it hot enough to blister my skin. In seconds my body shook, but I could not stop moving. Closer, its mouth opening wider, rows of teeth breaking away, falling, clattering into the stone, each tooth long enough to pierce through me whole. And the smoke shoved me nearer. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. My throat burned raw. The only thing in my chest was a low vibration, as though my voice had been stolen, replaced by something else, something crawling through my lungs. I felt it inside me, tiny hands clawing against my ribs, scratching to get out. The towering thing leaned closer, pressing its endless face of shifting mouths inches from mine, and every single mouth spoke my name in perfect unison. Sound shattered me. I dropped to my knees, hands clamped over my head, but the voices drilled straight through the bone. I felt blood run from my ears, hot down my neck. I begged inside my mind, not out loud, but in the only place I had left. I begged to wake up, to escape, to be anywhere but here. But the thing answered back in my own voice, whispering inside my skull, you are already home. You never left. You belong here. You always did. The ground split wider, the pit opening like a wound, the heat pouring stronger, waves of fire licking the cavern walls, figures falling in without resistance, their bodies crumbling to ash Before even touching the flames, their screams echoing only to be swallowed by the thing above the pit. It lowered its limb again, this time piercing the ground just beside me, cracking the stone into pieces, lava spilling closer, burning against my boots. The smell of melting rubber filling the air. He scrambled back, but the smoke tightened around my throat, pulling me forward, my vision blurred, spots of black red dancing. I felt my chest cave, my ribs folding under pressure. I could not breathe. I could not fight. My own body rebelled, shaking violently. I collapsed flat against the stone, and the figures rushed closer, surrounding me, bending low, their faces inches from mine, their eyes burning brighter, their sewn mouths splitting open wider than a human jaw should stretch, the stitches snapping threads, falling as they open into gaping black holes. Some of them reached down, bony hands, sharp as blades, wrapping around my skull, holding me still as another pressed its mouth over my face, not kissing but consuming my nose and mouth, sealed shut by its flesh. I thrashed, tried to scream, but it sucked the air straight from my lungs, pulling harder, deeper, until I thought my chest would collapse. Its body shuddered as it inhaled my breath, stealing every ounce of air from me. My vision darkened, blackness pouring in from the edge. When I thought I was done, when the last spark of life flickered, the towering thing raised its massive limb again and slammed it into the pit. The entire cavern shook, stone raining from above, walls splitting wide open, rivers of fire spilling through the cracks. Was thrown across the stone, landing hard, my shoulders snapping, pain blinding. But through it all I saw the thing turning away, its endless limbs stretching upward, disappearing into the smoke, dragging the screaming faces with it, leaving me broken, gasping, choking on the last scraps of air. The cavern quaked harder, the pit tearing wider, the figures around me screaming now, their mouths fully open, no longer stitched, their voices sharp, high like knives, scraping glass. They rushed for the pit, diving willingly, one after another, their bodies catching fire, before vanishing into the flames, until only I remained alone on the stone floor. The ground split again under me, lava spraying upward, burning against my skin. I scrambled to my feet, body broken, bones grinding with every step, but instinct forced me forward, away from the pit, away from the fire. The cavern walls opened wider, cracks spilling light brighter than fire, a light not orange but white, sharp and blinding. I stumbled toward it, heat boiling behind me, the sound of the pit collapsing, the roars of the thing fading into the distance. I threw myself into the light, screaming, and the cavern vanished, replaced not by safety, not by sky, but by silence, complete and suffocating. The white light swallowed me whole, burning against my skin until I thought my body would peel apart, layer by layer. Yet the moment I crossed into it, the heat vanished, replaced by a silence so heavy it pressed on my skull like the weight of an ocean. My ears rang sharp, but beneath the ringing was nothing, nowhere moving, no sound at all. Just a void that hummed through my bones. Opened my eyes and saw that I was standing not on stone, not in fire, but on something that stretched endless in every direction, flat and gray, smooth like concrete, but too perfect, without cracks, without dust, without any sign of life above me. No ceiling, no sky, only that white endless glow that hurt to look at, though it had no source, no sun, no flame, just light pouring from everywhere. And nowhere me breath came ragged, each inhale too loud against the silence, echoing in a way that should not have been possible. The the sound of it bouncing back from distances too far to see. I tried to call out my voice, breaking raw, but the sound returned twisted, warped, like someone else repeating it a half-second late. As though the space itself was mocking me, walked forward, though nothing marked direction. Each step soft against the smooth surface, yet the echoes. My steps came back sharper, louder, like hundreds of feet marching in rhythm behind me. I froze, spun around, but saw nothing, only the white, endless horizon stretching in every direction. Still the sound continued, boots stomping against the floor. Closer and closer until they were right behind me, yet when I reached back, nothing touched me, only air and that silence rushing back. When the footsteps stopped, he started to run, panic driving me faster. My broken shoulders screaming pain, but I forced myself onward, each stride tearing through the silence, but always the sound returned a beat too late, echoing like a shadow chasing me, growing louder until it was deafening, so loud it made my teeth rattle. I screamed again, my voice shredded, and again the sound returned, delayed, twisted, carrying words I had not spoken. It said, "Let it," and the floor beneath me shifted, smooth concrete rippling like water. My feet sinking ankle deep before I could pull free. The surface hardened again, trapping me where I stood. I clawed at the ground, skin tearing, nails breaking, but the surface would not crack. The glow above brightened, searing my eyes, until spots of black swam across my vision, and in those spots I saw faces, thousands of them pressed flat against the light, staring down at me, their mouths open wide in perfect silence. The faces moved, their eyes following me, lips twitching, but no sound ever came. I screamed up at them, begged them to stop, but still they stared, their mouths wider and wider until the skin split down their cheeks, black liquid pouring like ink that floated down from above, dripping onto the ground, each drop hissing as it touched the smooth surface, burning holes that opened into black tunnels beneath Mephram. Those holes something began to crawl, long pale arms with joints bending backward, fingers sharp, wet, scraping against the smooth floor, pulling themselves out, first one, then another, then dozens, until the space around me was filled with them. Their bodies long and thin, skin stretched tight over bones, heads too small for their frames, eyes stitched shut, their mouths wide and wet, snapping open and closed, as if chewing through the silence. As they dragged themselves toward me, their limbs scratching, leaving trails across the floor. I pulled against the ground, screaming, until blood poured from my wrists where the surface cut me raw. The creatures reached closer, unpressing its mouth against my ankle, its teeth sinking through cloth and skin, tearing down to the bone. I howled, the sound echoing, twisted back with laughter. Dozens of voices layered over my own ground, softened again, my legs sinking deeper up to my knees. Then my waist, the creatures climbing onto me, biting, clawing, tearing strips of flesh as the floor swallowed me whole. I thrashed, but the harder I fought, the deeper I sank, until only my head remained above the surface, the creatures swarming over me, their mouths snapping inches from my eyes, their teeth grinding together, spraying black spit across my facility. Faces above bent closer, their silent mouths gaping so wide they became nothing but holes in the glowing surface, and from those holes poured rivers of ink, rushing down, drowning everything in darkness, swallowing, creatures swallowing me until I could no longer breathe, only choke as the void dragged me deeper, and in that last second, before the blackness consumed me entirely, I heard it again. The voice that had spoken in the cavern, not echoing, not delayed, but clear and sharp inside my skull, saying, "You are ready." The blackness did not kill me, though I prayed it would. It wrapped around me thick. Endless the ink filling my lungs, choking me, yet no matter how much I gagged, no matter how my chest heaved, I did not die. I only floated weightless in that suffocating dark, the silence tighter than before, pressing in until I thought my skull would split it. From inside that silence came whispers, not echoing, not delayed, but layered one upon another, thousands of voices speaking at once, whispering my name over and over until it bled together into one constant sound vibrating through my bones. My veins, my teeth, they called me like they had always known me, like they had been waiting. I tried to cover my ears, but the blackness moved with me, swallowing my arms, fusing them against my chest until I could not move, and still the whispers grew louder, until they were no longer whispers, but screams crashing together like a storm in my head. I felt my eyes tear open, though I could not see, felt my mouth rip wider, though no sound came from me, and in that tearing I knew the truth. This place was not a trail, not a cave, not even the cursed mouth of the earth. It was the inside of something alive, something ancient, something endless, and I was inside. Its throat blackness shifted, and I was standing again, the ground beneath me wet and soft like living flesh, pulsing faintly with each beat, the walls slick with veins that bulged and twitched, leaking that same black ink. The air smelled of copper, rotten. When I touched the wall, my hands sank in, warm and wet, like I had pressed into a wound. I stumbled back, but the wall quivered like it was breathing. I had the passage stretched into forever, but I could feel it drawing me, pulling me with each step until I no longer chose to walk, but was dragged forward, muscles moving against my will. My chest aching with the pressure that grew tighter, the whispers screaming now, until they cracked into laughter, harsh and brokeny, came to a chamber, vast and round, its walls rising high, then curving inward like a skull turned inside out. Every inch of it pulsed with veins, and from the ceiling hung shapes suspended by cords of flesh, twisting slowly, their bodies broken, twisted faces I recognized. Faces from the village, from the town, from hikers I had seen on the trail. Their mouths sewn shut, their eyes gouged hollow, yet their bodies still moved, twitching like marionettes. Pulled by unseen strings, at the center of the chamber stood something taller than any tree, its body stretched thin and endless, pale skin crawling with veins, its head nothing but a gaping hole where a face should be inside, that hole the same white light I had seen pouring like fire across the chamber, spilling down. On me it turned, though it had no eyes, and when it faced me, the whispers stopped, leaving only silence. The silence tore at me harder than the noise. Had it pulled my skin tight against bone, my mouth opened without my will, and from me came a voice, mine not human, deep and hollow, saying, "I give myself." And the figure bent low, its arms stretching impossibly long, wrapping around me, dragging me closer into the whole of its face, the light consuming me, burning through every vein, every thought, until there was no pain, only absence seen. In that absence I understood I was no longer outside of it, was inside it, part of it, a vein and nerve, a whisper among thousands. My body dissolved into the pulsing walls, my voice one more layered into the Storm that would call the next wanderer down the trail. No, I know why the trail ends. It is why the stones are warm, why the people vanish, and why the earth itself feels hungry. It is not the land that swallows them, it is the thing beneath. The land, the thing that has always been waiting, and I am its voice now whispering, waiting, hungry. So, if you ever find yourself at the mouth of Dry Creek Trailhead, if you feel the air grow heavy, if you hear your name spoken though no one is there, turn back, because if you step forward, if you breathe the silence too deep, you will hear me calling. And once you hear me, you will never leave.